Darth Vader, one of the most iconic and well-written characters, not only in Star Wars but all of fiction. Today we are going to be talking about how strong Darth Vader really is. Now, to preface, for this video, I will be mainly looking at canon Vader. If you're more of a Legends person and aren't super into the canon stuff, you are 100% entitled to that opinion. I say fair. That's just what I'm going with for this video. After this video, you will have a perfect idea of how strong Darth Vader is in the context of Star Wars itself. Without further ado, let's get straight into the discussion. Starting off, it's important to discuss how Darth Vader compares to other apprentices Sidious has had, or other Sith Lords in general. It's been directly noted that Darth Vader himself was recognized as Sidious's greatest apprentice, to the extent that he was Sidious's most powerful apprentice by light years. This type of diction or terminology putting him massively above the likes of Dooku and Maul. This is consistent with Palpatine's sentiments about Darth Vader and Kieran Gillen's run, where Sidious expresses Maul and Dooku were never the end goals. Sidious required an apprentice with might. For the Empire to live, Darth Vader had to live. This sentiment also gets expressed with other statements, such as Darth Vader being described as Yoda and Obi-Wan's greatest enemy. This really shouldn't be a hard pill to swallow, or shouldn't be at least, as Anakin Skywalker himself should have eclipsed both these individuals, whether with Anakin outright defeating Dooku, or Ahsoka herself believing Maul wouldn't have lasted long against Anakin, that being a more outdated opinion by the way, or just later statements about Vader in direct relation to Maul. Before I touch on Anakin in the suit, I do want to talk about Darth Vader during the events of Revenge of the Sith and Operation Nightfall. It is directly noted that Anakin Skywalker was actually peerless with a lightsaber even among the Jedi Order, being touted as stronger in the Force than any other Jedi with the highest midichlorian count to date. Anakin's feat of defeating Dooku is impressive when you consider that him and Yoda are pseudo-rivals, with Yoda slightly edging out Dooku and being a far superior duelist compared to Dooku. Keeping in mind that Anakin was actually able to defeat the most prime Count Dooku that we've seen, being noted to be far more powerful than ever, does entail that Anakin was truly tapping into a tier comparable to the likes of Yoda, at the very least in terms of Force and lightsaber prowess. This would obviously extend over to Nightfall Vader, as he would grow stronger due to falling to the dark side. What I really want to home in on is Darth Vader's fight with Obi-Wan on Mustafar, as it's expressed numerous times that Anakin was more powerful than Obi-Wan and an overall superior warrior. There being multiple statements that exist that note that it's more so Obi-Wan's cool head and knowledge on Anakin is what allowed him to perform as well as he did. After all, Kenobi is his master, which ended up being the reason the duo were able to predict each other's moves with ease. Again, this sentiment is expressed numerous times across different sources, with the general theme being that Anakin was running on anger, hate, power, or his strength. So we have an overall more sloppy Anakin coupled with the one person who knew all of his moves and kept a cool head, being able to predict them. A common theme with Darth Vader that kind of does sell him in a lot of fights is, while he's still powerful, combined with a lack of skill due to being reckless as Palpatine described it, it just overall causes him to lose fights that he really shouldn't lose. This sentiment being expressed again in the Obi-Wan show, where Sidious chides Vader on a similar point, noting perhaps your feelings for your old master have left you weakened. This type of point being more so in reference to a more inexperienced and younger Vader, and this does dial back to the Mustafar fight, as it's directly noted in Skywalker: A Family of War that Vader himself during the fight felt more insecure than ever before and was terrified of losing everything. Anakin post-Jedi Temple rage being noted to be replaced with despair and self-loathing. This is important since it's noted during the Purge that Anakin possessed a disturbingly calculated calm, with him marching towards his sworn enemy but like a droid executing its programming. So you get a much more calculated Anakin during the Jedi Purge compared to the Mustafar version that is insecure, very reckless, and running on pure rage, which is what ended up allowing Obi-Wan to slime him at the end. This would transition us into Vader's early suit, where he is noted to be weaker compared to Nightfall Anakin, but is noted to overall still have a great deal of power. We see that in just a few hours to days after the events of Revenge of the Sith, Vader goes into a fight with a Jedi who's actually noted to be more powerful than anybody he's fought before, that being Kirak Infila. I don't know if I said that right, who would be above Revenge of the Sith Obi-Wan off of this metric. Vader does lose to Karak, however, this isn't really a huge anti-feat when you consider he's noted to be on par with Vader on the opposite end of the Force, and Vader was actually able to eventually overcome him and beat him after losing once to him, just on the beginning end of his journey into the dark side. So Vader, even fresh off Revenge of the Sith, was actually able to beat an Obi-Wan plus level combatant while not being able to use his suit and not even possessing a lightsaber, which is actually stated to amplify someone's connection to the Force during battle. Vader would go on to get massively stronger throughout his career, and to be clear, Vader's always getting stronger. He's quite literally hitting a new prime anytime you see him on the Star Wars timeline. One of the more younger iterations of Darth Vader that we're introduced to is the one from the Obi-Wan Kenobi show, or just Obi-Wan Kenobi, taking place around 10 years after Revenge of the Sith. During this time frame, it's actually noted, at least by Hayden Christensen, that this is a 100% fully realized Vader. Other statements directly noting how Vader is in his prime during the events of the show, and how, by Obi-Wan himself, Vader felt enormous in comparison to his Mustafar counterpart. It's also noted that the version of Kenobi that Vader lost to was not only at full strength, this just being stated outright or in the show itself by Vader, but was actually amped from his determination to save Luke and Leia, as it's described he was pulling strength from Anakin's children, the future of their cause. This is a version of Vader that still hasn't quite overcome the Anakin limitation, this being directly noted by director Deborah Chow, who notes during the events of the show, Vader is still half Anakin, half Vader at this point, with us feeling a stronger drive of Anakin from within the character. Like we established earlier, Anakin himself does get more reckless earlier in his career, and him peering through the cracks of Vader here does actually cause Vader to be a lot more reckless and less level-headed in his fight with Obi-Wan or their rematch. This is actually something Vader would learn to overcome, especially in reference to vestiges of his past, as Vader is always in a state of progression, like we see in Star Wars Rebels, where it's stated Vader is in a new prime. Again, every time you see a version of Vader down the timeline, he's always in a new prime version of himself. This being not only stated, but expressed with him having overcome the restrictions of his life support entirely and developing his own saber form, with statements from this time period directly noting that Vader himself just has no weaknesses and has overall become unstoppable. It's also displayed that Vader at this point actually has much more control over his rage compared to earlier iterations of the character, as it's stated his rage is recently noted to make him much more powerful for Ahsoka, meaning in all likelihood he was able to overcome his anger, at least compared to the Obi-Wan counterpart that was more susceptible to it and was stated to be directly impacting a lot of his actions, which again is evident from the plot of the show. So compared to his Obi-Wan counterpart, Vader just hit a new prime and is a completely different fighter. I don't think I really need to waste any time discussing how Maul and Ahsoka really aren't a match for Vader. Maul during the events of the show just says he cannot defeat Vader alone, and Ahsoka, on top of just losing a fight with Vader, was actually stated to die when a mysterious portal appeared behind her. So we actually do know that Vader just was stronger than both of these individuals. Shouldn't really be a hot take, and I think that's just, that's pretty self-explanatory. I don't really think I have to do too much on this one. So we know Vader's in a constant state of progression, but I think one of the biggest topics to discuss in reference to Darth Vader himself is he weaker than Anakin or his Mustafar counterpart? Has he gotten weaker after his Mustafar injuries, and is he just a shadow of his former self? Well, one of the most common points you will see is that Vader is weaker than Anakin. This stems from one statement from George Lucas and some other Legends guides, the argument more so basing Anakin just losing limbs with his midichlorian count directly dropping, which in turn cliffs the upper limits of his potential. This kind of does depend on how you take George Lucas's statement in direct relation to Disney canon as a whole, as weirdly enough, nothing in the Disney canon really actually indicates that losing limbs decreases your midichlorian count. It's kind of weird, but give me a second. In discussing the idea that loss of body mass or severed limbs results in weaker force ability, it's noted that Darth Maul, who was bisected, actually was able to reclaim his former power in Rebels and actually became significantly stronger later on in a rematch against Obi-Wan. So we know you actually can surpass your previous limitations even if you do lose limbs. However, it also should be noted that this is mentioned again by Leland Chi, who is a member of the Lucasfilm story group. Does also share a similar sentiment: when force users lose parts of their body, does their strength in the force diminish? and he doesn't really think so, citing Maul again as the example for this. It's also noted directly that Darth Vader himself actually still had more midichlorians than anyone in the galaxy, being cited with his 20,000 plus, which does support the notion that on top of his midichlorian count stated to be the same, it didn't get cut down at all on Mustafar, which is why he's in this perpetual state of hitting new primes all the time. We also know Vader's suit limitation was something of a non-factor later on in his career, most people actually believing that his suit weakened him, but this really wasn't the case, as his power on the dark side surpassed any physical limitation. I can't really tell you how to interpret the George Lucas statement in relation to the new canon. Just the idea that you lose midichlorians when you get body parts severed isn't quite as explicit, but if you still did want to take this statement, I can't really say much. I think it's entirely fair. It just is pretty important for how you interpret Vader's scaling, especially in reference to later characters such as Palpatine himself. I didn't really answer the question though. Does Vader actually surpass Anakin? Well, he should have officially surpassed Anakin during the events of the Lords of the Sith canon novel, as during this time period it's noted that Vader's powers were not diminished and that his power had become unparalleled even in reference to Anakin Skywalker. This being more relevant as Darth Sidious himself is the one making the distinction. It could be possible he's just making a general statement, but that doesn't really make too much sense. Since the way this statement is set up, it's directly relating Vader during the events of Revenge of the Sith to him during the Lords of the Sith novel, noting he was still unparalleled. Even if you don't want to take it at face value, this is more so a tiering level in my opinion, to where Darth Vader can now fulfill that unparalleled tier level that Anakin during the events of Revenge of the Sith was able to. It's also just noted that Vader was stronger than ever after purging the last vestiges of Anakin Skywalker from his psyche. Something that would add to this is that his connection to the dark side and the Force actually grew post Mustafar incident, as he's actually noted to be more connected to the Force than when his fury burned, or it's just noted that the whole incident strengthened his connection to the Force as a whole. It's also worth mentioning that Palpatine was actually wary of Vader's potential at this point and was actually trying to manipulate him just to kind of, be prepared in case he tried to overthrow him. The exact quote being, somewhere in the back of Palpatine's mind, he knows what Vader's potential is. He may feel as if he's wrong, but he is wary of it. He's always very interested in determining his ability to manipulate Vader and testing his loyalty and assuring himself that the tiger that he holds by the tail is going to stay that way. So even Vader's potential is high enough to where Palpatine does have to keep it in mind. Later variations of Vader, such as the version that appears during A New Hope, is just stated to be more powerful and experienced compared to Anakin, or if you wanted to interpret this statement as in reference to the Obi-Wan show, which kind of recontextualized the whole student-master exchange in the Death Star, then it means that Vader in A New Hope is stronger than his Obi-Wan counterpart, which, again, this being noted many times that Vader is always hitting a new prime, shouldn't really be a hard pill to swallow when you consider Vader was constantly honing his skills and meditating, which is also just stated to amplify his dark side powers. Again, a lot of the time we do see Vader's conflicted against the select opponents from his past, which does directly impact his ability to fight as a Sith. It's also noted that the Vader that fights Obi-Wan or Ben on the Death Star is far more controlled compared to the previous versions that had fought against him, which does add consistency to the point that Vader gets more reckless, more hot-headed, and more sloppy as a whole when fighting select characters like Obi-Wan himself. Statements of Vader being at this new prime level is consistent with other sentiments, such as Darth Vader himself being stated in the top 5 red lightsaber wielders being at the number 1 slot, even in direct comparison to Darth Sidious himself. I'm going to touch on Darth Vader in relation to Sidious in a bit, but that is something I want people to keep in mind, that Darth Vader is at kind of this higher tier and needs to more so be compared to Sidious than anybody else. Darth Vader has similar sentiments about his combat prowess being unparalleled and his skill with the lightsaber overall being terrifying as a whole, with him also having statements of just being the most dangerous opponent in the galaxy. I think what's more important though is discussing how he compares to Palpatine himself, as there are statements that do directly indicate Darth Vader as a whole was equally formidable to the likes of Palpatine himself. The Black-Cloaked Emperor has fulfilled his masterful plan and taken control of the entire galaxy, with the equally formidable Dark Lord of the Sith by his side, so Darth Vader during this time period is very powerful. But what is important to note during this time period is that Vader's conflictions come back tenfold with Luke. Now we do see that Vader during his confrontation with Luke on Bespin's Cloud City is that he was absolutely throttling him. This is pretty evident based on the fight as a whole visually, it being stated numerous times that Luke is no match for the Sith Lord, along with the fact that the one blow Luke got on Vader in Cloud City was on a briefly overconfident Vader, allowing Luke to land a glancing blow on his armor. So Luke doesn't really scale to Vader in any considerable way. The reason I bring this up is that Darth Vader, after his interaction with Luke, actually does visit Padme's grave, which only adds to his confliction. The reason I bring this up is that during the events of the Vader comic, Palpatine essentially no-diffs Vader, which ignores a lot of context if you take it at surface value, as Vader himself is stated to be wallowing in grief, the weakness being stated to return. This is important since, like I'm going to talk about in one moment, conflict and sentiment absolutely murder Sith abilities. So Palpatine no-diffing Vader here really isn't an accurate representation. It's directly noted that Vader is losing control over his feelings, which is going to be his undoing again. It being directly cited that this is similar to facing Kenobi on Mustafar, so we know Vader just isn't in the correct mental state even up until Return of the Jedi. It's also noted post-trial that Vader actually ends up still conflicted towards the end, as he's still seeing flashbacks of Luke from Cloud City, but does actually end up becoming more powerful than ever. So Vader, even conflicted, actually is improving strength-wise, which always puts him in a weird position since now he's conflicted, particularly with Luke or in general, yet has just become more powerful than ever. Post-trial, it's also just described that Vader and Sidious are the most powerful beings in the galaxy. Vader being put directly alongside Sidious in terms of his threat level, also being described in external media as the ultimate Dark Lord of the galaxy. We also see that even at a later point that Vader directly notes in reference to the handmaiden that looks exactly like Padme that I am more powerful than I have ever been, but I am not in control. So it is entirely possible for Vader to be stronger and still conflicted, which is what is happening post Bespin City fight and post seeing Padme's grave and going through his great trial. I believe this is representative with Vader being able to control or handle Palpatine's full force lightning with one hand compared to the version of Vader that got no-diffed by it earlier on, this being done while Vader is actually multitasking, attempting to release the Scourge on his planet. I believe this all culminates to Vader's final prime, which is what happens in Return of the Jedi, where he's directly noted to be more powerful than ever before in the Force, as well as in terms of mastering the lightsaber, being at his absolute peak in terms of force power and lightsaber combat, with his presence in the Force also just being directly stated to be equal to Palpatine's as a whole. I know I mentioned Vader's conflict previously, but it is apparent that he doesn't want to fight Luke, this being stated numerous times, with the faint spark in his soul that was Anakin Skywalker being almost reignited and having that internal struggle. There's just so many statements of Vader being conflicted during the events of Return of the Jedi and during the fight with Luke itself that I don't really think it's a big pill for people to swallow. I think most people could probably grasp that Darth Vader, who has always been susceptible to emotions and vestiges of his past, is conflicted with fighting with his son. It's also noted that Vader at his weakest point was actually able to just tank Sidious's Force lightning even while he was returning to the light side and letting go of his hate, which was able to keep him alive even without his suit operating, as we established. It being directly stated that Vader is weaker than he'd ever had been, yet was still able to perform this sort of feat. So in terms of feats and general presentation, Vader just really shouldn't be considered in an entirely separate tier to Palpatine as a whole, and is more so described as a pseudo rival or someone that can compete on a similar tier with him, is being much more apparent, at least in reference to the Disney canon, whereas the Legend statement just has Vader at an 80 compared to being able to become twice as powerful as Palpatine. I more so want to draw attention to the fact that Vader is ridiculous in comparison to other characters in Star Wars, and is more so losing due to character traits, conflict, Anakin Skywalker seeping through, yet at his absolute higher ends, does just scale above the likes of Anakin Skywalker and is more of a Palpatine level threat in the grand scheme of the Star Wars universe, especially in reference to the final version of Palpatine we see, at least before the sequel trilogy. That's the video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. I sure did. Let me know if you agree, disagree, why. What are your overall thoughts on Darth Vader? Where do you have him? Let me know if you guys want to see more Star Wars videos and maybe this type of video for somebody else in the Star Wars canon. I would love to do that. Obviously, keep it cool in the comments. I know it's Star Wars and it can get a little hot. It's Star Wars. We're cool. We're talking about our favorite franchise. We all love the series. Let's just hold hands and be happy. We don't gotta hold hands. I will catch you guys next time. Bye-bye.